Today I want to share with you some of the most common rhythms that we see in music. We can also add a dot to the notes. So if I were to take a whole note and add a dot, the dot actually gives me half of the original value. So again, if our whole note gets 4, then we would have to divide 4 by 2, so divide 4 in half, which gives us 2, and then we add that to the original value. So 4 plus 2 is 6. So we would get a total of 6 beats for a dotted whole note. Let's do the same thing for a dotted half note. So if we take a half note and we add a dot to it, we initially take half of the half note value, and the half note value is 2. So if we divide that in half, we get 1. So we would add 2 plus 1, which would give us 3 beats. So this would equal 3 beats. Our dotted half note would be 3 beats, and our dotted whole note at top would be 6 beats. Now let's go ahead and keep doing this, just so I can show my work. If I were to add a dot to a quarter note, you can try this on your own if you'd like. See if you can beat me. Quarter note is worth 1 beat. So if we divide 1 in half, we get half a beat, so it would be 1 plus a half, or 1 and a half. So the dotted quarter note gets 1 and 1/2 beat. Now I'll just do this for one final note, which may be a little bit confusing because once we get into those smaller fractions, it's a little bit harder to deal with. But our 8th note gets half of a beat. So if we divide half of a beat in half, we get a quarter of a beat. So we have to add 1/2 plus 1/4, and that means that we get 3/4 of a beat, 3/4 of a beat for a dotted quarter note. Now you can add a dot to any value. So if you have a 16th note or a 32nd note or a 64th note, you can add a dot and the same rule applies. Now in some contexts, it's very rare, but sometimes we'll see what's called a double dotted note. And so if we have a double dotted note, let's say we have a quarter note, and there's 2 dots. The first dot will take half of the value of the quarter note. So we have 1 for the original, and then the dot would represent half of the original value. So that would be half of a beat. And then the second dot would represent half of the first dot. So we would get a quarter. So then we have to add the first, which is 1 beat. Then we have to add the first dot, which is half a beat. And then we have to add a quarter beat. So all that together would be 1 and how much? Can you figure it out on your own? If you got 1 and 3/4, that would be correct. Now we can do this for any of the notes, just like adding 1 dot. And in fact, there are even some pieces of music in some contexts when you can have 3 dots. Now that's pretty rare. We see that in very new music, like the neo-complexity music with composers like Fernhow and the New York School. But it can happen, so we should look out for that. And that would be the same principle. So you'd have to take half of the previous dot. I haven't seen anyone compose with 4 dots, but I'm sure someone somewhere has done that. Now on top of grouping them into little dots, another thing that we can do that's very common is to group notes into what we call triplets. So for example, if I were to take a quarter note, and let's say we're in 4/4, there would be 4 beats or 4 quarter notes in that measure, 3 quarter notes, which normally would take up 3 out of the 4 beats in our measure, I can group those together in a triplet. Basically what I'm saying is that there's 3 in the time of what used to be 2. So sometimes you'll see this terminology 3:2. And other times, which is what's most common, you'll just see the 3. Now this means that there's now 3 notes in the time of 2. So it's kind of like a little tempo change. And in order to finish out our bar, we would still need 2 full beats, which we could use either 2 quarter notes, or we could use a half note, or any combination of 2 beats. Now this triplet can happen with any of the notes that would fit in the measure. So for example, if we're in 4/4, normally we would have 2 half notes that could make up a 4/4 bar. However, if we wanted to be creative, let's say we wanted to layer time like composers like Philip Glass do, or Steve Reich, if we wanted to layer time, we could layer and say, let's have 3 half notes in the time of what was 2 half notes. And then we add an extra half note in there to create some interesting polyrhythms or some interesting layers. Now, of course, this can happen with eighth notes. And oftentimes when we're in a duple meter like 4/4, our eighth notes are grouped to show the beat. So sometimes we'll group them like this, and this would be the first beat, and this would be the second beat here, and then so on and so forth. But if we were going to group this as a triplet, then this third eighth note has to take on the place of the first beat. So in fact, we actually have to group all 3 eighth notes together. We write a little 3 over it, and that becomes 1 beat. Now our second beat would start here, and we could do, let's just say, a quarter note to make it simple. And then let's say beat 3 and beat 4 are just simple quarter notes. And therefore we can have our triplet eighth notes in our beat of, or in our bar of 4/4. So that's how we make dotted notes and triplets in a standard piece of music. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you've learned something. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'd love to talk to you more in depth about this if you do.